Most people lose authority the moment they open their mouth. Not because of what they say, because of what their words reveal before they've finished saying it. The hesitation underneath the sentence. The slight upward lift that turns a statement into a question. The qualifier slipped in before the most important word. Just, kind of, sort of, that whispers. I'm not entirely sure I have the right to say this. It happens in seconds. And once it happens, something shifts in the room. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone could name out loud. But the impression has already formed, faster than thought, faster than judgment, and it will shape everything that follows. You've been in rooms where someone spoke and the energy organized itself around them, and rooms where someone spoke and the energy quietly moved away. The difference was almost never what they said. It was something underneath the words, something in the way the words arrived. That something has a name. It is the language of authority. And most people have never been taught it, because most communication advice starts in exactly the wrong place. It starts with what to say, better arguments, stronger vocabulary, the perfect opening line for a difficult conversation. These things are not useless, but they are surface adjustments to a problem that lives much deeper. And applying surface solutions to deep problems produces, at best, a more articulate version of the same fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is this. Most people speak from the outside in. They begin with the words they think they're supposed to say and work backward toward meaning. They construct the sentence first and hope conviction will follow. They perform the confidence they don't yet feel. And because the performance is slightly ahead of the reality, the gap shows. Not always visibly, but in the places that matter most. The microsignals the human nervous system reads instantly, even when the conscious mind doesn't register them. Effective communicators do the opposite. They begin from the inside, from genuine clarity about what they think, what they mean, what they actually want to say. And the words that emerge from that clarity arrive differently. They're simpler, more direct, less padded with the defensive architecture of someone who isn't sure their words deserve to be heard. This is not a technique. It is a completely different relationship with communication itself. Think about the most authoritative person you've ever encountered in a professional setting. Not the loudest, not the most aggressive, not the one who dominated through sheer volume. The one whose words carried weight in a way that was difficult to explain, who could say less than everyone else in the room and somehow be heard more clearly. What was it about them? They didn't rush to fill silence. They didn't over-explain. They didn't look around after making a point, scanning for confirmation that it landed well. They made statements that ended like statements, flat, complete, requiring nothing added to them. None of that was accidental, and none of it was innate. It was the product of a particular internal orientation, one that can be learned, practiced, and over time, inhabited so completely that it stops being something you do and becomes something you simply are. That orientation begins with a single, uncomfortable recognition. Most people are not communicating to be understood. They are communicating to be accepted. The goal, operating just below the level of awareness in most professional exchanges, is not clarity. It is approval. Words are chosen not primarily for their accuracy, but for their safety, their likelihood of being received well, of not causing friction, of maintaining the comfortable surface of the relationship while the actual substance quietly dissolves beneath it. And the people listening feel this. They feel the gap between the managed surface and whatever is happening underneath. They respond to that gap, not with the trust the speaker hoped for, but with a quiet, unexamined sense that this person is not fully present in their own words. This is how authority is lost, not in dramatic failures, but in the accumulated weight of small hedges, quiet approval seeking, and the chronic habit of arriving at conversations already managing how you'll be received. This audiobook is about reversing that pattern, not through techniques, not through performing a confidence you haven't earned, but through something more fundamental, a shift in how you relate to your own thinking, your own voice, your own right to communicate with precision and without apology. 11 sections, 11 ideas, each one addressing a specific layer of how authoritative communication is built. By the time you reach the final section, you will not simply understand these ideas. You will feel them settling into something that begins to resemble instinct. But it starts here. With this, the moment you open your mouth, you are communicating far more than your words. You are communicating your relationship with your own thinking. That communication is happening whether you're aware of it or not. The only question is whether you begin to shape it deliberately. Section 2. Thinking before you speak. There is a moment. Most people miss it entirely. It lasts less than 2 seconds. It sits between the instant someone says something to you and the instant you respond. The space between stimulus and reaction. Between what you heard and what you decide to do with it. Most people don't live in that space. They pass through it so quickly it might as well not exist. The question lands. The answer leaves. The silence opens. The words rush in to close it. And in doing so, most people give away something they didn't know they had. That 2-second window is where the most important communication decisions are made. Not in boardrooms, not in prepared speeches. In ordinary Tuesday afternoon conversations that quietly define how people see you over time. Here is what happens to most people under pressure. Someone says something unexpected, or asks something difficult, or challenges a position you've held. And before you've had a single conscious thought, your emotional state has already drafted a response. The body tenses, the chest tightens, a familiar feeling rises up. Defensiveness, anxiety, the need to be understood. That feeling starts looking for an exit. The exit is your mouth. And the words that come out in those first unguarded seconds are rarely your best ones. They tell people how you're feeling far more clearly than they tell people what you think. And in most situations, what you think is what matters. This is the hidden cost of reactive speech. It doesn't just occasionally produce the wrong words. It consistently reveals the emotional state you're operating from. The pause is the first tool, but it's important to understand what the pause is not. It is not hesitation. Hesitation is involuntary. It comes from not knowing what to say and hoping that waiting will produce something. People can feel hesitation. It communicates uncertainty. It erodes trust in real time. The deliberate pause is entirely different. It is a conscious, half-second choice to let the question settle before you engage with it. It communicates that you take the conversation seriously, that you're not going to give a reflexive answer when a considered one is available. Watch what happens when someone pauses deliberately before answering a difficult question. There's a beat, a small moment of heightened attention. People lean in slightly. They wait. And when the answer comes, it carries more weight than it would have if it had arrived instantly. The pause creates gravity, and gravity is the invisible architecture of authority. There is a question that high-performing communicators have learned to ask themselves in that 2-second window. It isn't complicated, but it requires something most people rarely offer themselves in the middle of a conversation. It requires honesty. The question is simply this: what am I actually trying to say? Not, what should I say? Not, what will make me sound credible? Not, how do I get out of this moment without losing ground? What am I actually trying to say? Try applying it the next time a conversation puts pressure on you. In the 2 seconds before you respond, ask that question internally, just once, quickly, honestly, and notice what it does to the words that follow. They become more specific, more direct, less padded, less defensive, more like what you actually mean. That shift from performative speech to meaningful speech is not a small thing. Over time, across hundreds of conversations, it is the difference between being seen as someone who talks and being seen as someone who communicates. There is a biological dimension to this worth understanding. Emotional state and verbal clarity are physiologically linked. This is not a metaphor, it's neuroscience. When the nervous system perceives social threat, being challenged, being wrong in public, it activates a stress response. Cortisol rises. The prefrontal cortex, which handles nuanced thinking and precise language, temporarily loses bandwidth. What comes online instead is the primitive, reactive brain designed for speed, not for board meetings. This is why arguments produce the least coherent versions of the people having them. It's not that they've suddenly become less intelligent. It's that the part of their brain responsible for intelligent communication has been partially hijacked. The moment that feels like the worst time to pause is almost always the best time to pause. Calm isn't passivity. It is the active maintenance of access to your own best thinking. Something else happens when you develop the pause reflex. Something that takes longer to notice, but matters more. Other people begin to speak more carefully around you. When someone consistently responds with deliberate thought rather than reactive emotion, when they don't immediately match the energy of a tense conversation, don't rush to fill every silence. The people around them unconsciously calibrate. They begin to bring more considered versions of themselves to the conversation. This is influence without assertion, presence without performance. It starts with 2 seconds. In the next section, we go deeper into what happens when pressure intensifies, when the stakes are real, when emotions run high, and when the pause becomes not just useful but essential. Thinking before you speak is one skill. Thinking before you speak when everything in you wants to react, that is something else entirely. That is where calm authority is either built or lost. Section 3. Calm under pressure. Pressure doesn't change who you are. It reveals what you've trained. There is a particular kind of moment that reveals everything. Not the prepared presentation, not the rehearsed answer to the question you knew was coming. The moment that reveals everything is the one you didn't see coming. The meeting that turns hostile. The question designed to destabilize. The colleague who contradicts you in front of people whose opinion matters. The phone call that changes the terms of something you thought was settled. In those moments, unscripted, pressurized, emotionally charged, you find out exactly what your communication is made of. And for most people, what they find is uncomfortable. The voice tightens. Sentences get longer and less coherent. Words arrive faster but mean less. A defensive posture assembles itself automatically before the thinking mind has had a chance to weigh in. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. The problem is that the ancient stress response was not designed for navigating a difficult performance review. Let's be precise about what actually happens when pressure arrives. The moment the brain registers social threat, being challenged, contradicted publicly, put in a position where status or competence feels at risk, the amygdala fires. Stress hormones enter the bloodstream within seconds. Heart rate increases, breathing shallows, and critically, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for measured thinking and precise language, begins operating with reduced capacity. This is why smart people say things under pressure they immediately regret. It isn't a failure of intelligence. It's a predictable physiological response to perceived threat. The brain prioritizes survival speed over communication quality. And in a difficult conversation, that trade-off almost always costs more than it saves. There is a quality that changes everything in these moments. That quality is composure. And composure is almost always misunderstood. People confuse it with coldness, the flat effect of someone who doesn't care, who has suppressed their emotions so thoroughly that nothing reaches the surface. That's not composure. That's emotional shutdown. Real composure is something more nuanced, more impressive. It is the ability to feel the full weight of a pressurized moment, to register the stress, the discomfort, the pull toward reaction, and to choose, in the middle of all of that, how to respond. It is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of something stronger than the impulse to act on it immediately. Think about the people you've seen remain calm when everyone else in the room couldn't. Not detached, present. Not cold, steady. They weren't pretending the pressure wasn't there. They were simply refusing to let it borrow their voice. That refusal is a skill. And like every skill, it is built through repetition in low-stakes situations before it's available in high-stakes ones. The most accessible entry point into composure, available to anyone, in any moment, is the breath. Here is the mechanism. Slow, deliberate exhalation activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the system responsible for calming the stress response. A single slow breath out, longer than the breath in, measurably reduces heart rate, decreases cortisol, and restores partial access to the prefrontal cortex. Seconds, not minutes. Not a meditation retreat. Seconds. The next time a conversation turns unexpectedly difficult, before you respond, before you defend, Before you explain, exhale. Slowly, completely. And in those 2 or 3 seconds, your physiology begins to shift back toward the conditions that produce clear, authoritative communication. The leaders who communicate best under pressure aren't doing something mystical. They've internalized a handful of physical habits that keep them available to their own best thinking, even when everything around them is pushing in the opposite direction. There is a perception effect worth understanding here. Calm, under pressure, is not just internally useful. It is socially powerful in ways that are difficult to overstate. The nervous system is deeply social. We regulate each other's emotional states constantly, largely without awareness. When we're around someone who is anxious and reactive, we tend to escalate with them. When we're around someone who is calm, the pull is in the opposite direction. The calm person doesn't just communicate better. They change what everyone else in the room is capable of communicating. Composure is not a passive quality. It is an active form of leadership. The person who holds steadiness when the temperature rises is, by doing so, managing the environment, offering everyone else a different option. A lower temperature to calibrate to. Think about the last time someone stayed calm when everyone else didn't. The room didn't immediately relax, but it paused. The escalation lost momentum, and the calm person, almost without speaking, became the center of gravity. That is not a coincidence. That is the physics of emotional regulation in social environments. There is one more thing worth saying, something most frameworks leave out entirely. The goal under pressure is not to appear calm. The goal is to become it. Performed composure, the carefully managed exterior over a churning interior, is exhausting, fragile, and ultimately unconvincing. People sense the gap, the tight jaw beneath the neutral expression, the over-controlled voice that sounds rehearsed rather than settled. Authentic composure is different. It comes from a relationship with pressure that has been built over time, through repeated exposure, through learning that difficult moments pass, through the accumulated evidence that you have been in hard conversations before and found your way through them. It is earned, not performed, and the earning of it happens in the ordinary pressures of ordinary days. Every small frustration you choose not to voice reactively. Every mild provocation you choose not to match in kind. Every moment of low-level discomfort you sit inside long enough to find that it is manageable. Every one of those moments is a deposit. And composure, like most things that matter, is built from deposits. In the next section, we move from the internal world of regulation to the external world of perception. Because what you carry internally, the calm, the clarity, the emotional steadiness, is only part of the equation. The other part is how you bring it into a room before you've said a single word. That is presence, and it is more learnable than most people believe. Section 4. The psychology of presence. Before you speak, the room is already reading you. There is something that happens in the first few seconds after someone enters a room. Before they've spoken, before they've introduced themselves, before they've done anything that could reasonably be evaluated, something has already been communicated and received at a level most people are entirely unaware of. The room has already formed an impression, not a conscious one, necessarily, more like a felt sense. A quiet internal reading that happens faster than language, faster than thought, in the part of the brain that was processing social information long before human beings had words for any of it. A reading that answers, almost instantly, a question the room didn't know it was asking. Is this person settled, or are they searching? That question, and its answer, is the foundation of presence. And presence, real presence, the kind that shifts the energy of a room without demanding anything from it, is one of the most misunderstood qualities in all of human communication. Most people think of presence as something you either have or you don't, a mysterious quality distributed unevenly at birth, charisma's quieter cousin, available to the naturally magnetic and inaccessible to everyone else. This is wrong, and understanding why it's wrong is the beginning of being able to build it. Presence is not a personality trait. It is a communicated state. It is the outward signal of an inward condition, specifically the condition of being fully here, in this moment, in this room, without the low-level anxiety of needing this moment to be something other than what it is. That condition, full, unhurried presence, is rare. Most people are only partially in the room they're physically occupying. Part of them is in the conversation that happened an hour ago. Part of them is in the meeting after this one. Part of them is monitoring how they're currently being perceived, which is perhaps the most presence-destroying habit of all, because the act of watching yourself from the outside pulls you out of the inside. And people feel that absence immediately. The nervous system reads presence through several channels simultaneously. Each one is trainable. The first is stillness. Most people in social or professional situations are in a state of low-level physical restlessness. Shifting weight, touching the face, moving hands without purpose. These micro-movements are not random. They are the physical expression of internal unease. The body doing what anxious systems do, searching for relief through motion. Stillness is the opposite. Not rigidity, stillness. The quality of being physically settled in a space, of not needing to rearrange yourself, of allowing your body to occupy its position without apology or adjustment. When someone is physically still, the brain reads it as psychological security. They are not threatened. They are not performing. They are simply here. Before a high-stakes conversation, before you walk into a room that matters, take a moment. Feel your feet on the floor. Release the tension in your shoulders. Slow your breathing to a pace that matches someone who isn't in a hurry. You are not just managing nerves. You are constructing the physiological state that presence requires. The second channel is eye contact, but not the way it's usually taught. Most advice about eye contact focuses on duration. Hold it long enough to seem confident, not so long that you seem aggressive. This framing misses the point entirely. The quality that matters in eye contact isn't duration. It's attention. There is a difference, palpable, immediate, between being looked at by someone who is seeing you and being looked at by someone who is performing the act of looking at you. One feels like contact. The other feels like technique. And people know the difference instantly, even if they couldn't articulate how. The leaders who communicate with the most presence aren't thinking about their eye contact. They're thinking about the person in front of them. And that genuine curiosity produces a quality of attention that no technique can replicate. This is a more demanding instruction than hold eye contact for 4 seconds. It requires actually being interested, actually listening, directing your attention outward rather than running it back on yourself. But the return on that investment is presence. Real, felt, unmistakable presence. The kind that makes people feel, after a conversation with you, that they were the only person in the room. The third channel is pace, specifically, the pace at which you move, speak, and respond. Urgency is contagious. So is its absence. When someone enters a room quickly, sits down fast, launches into speech immediately, they communicate, non-verbally, that they are operating under pressure, that they are in a hurry to get somewhere else, to get past this moment and on to the next one. The brain reads this as stress, and stress, in a leader, is unsettling. The deliberate slowing of physical pace, entering a room without rushing it, allowing a beat of silence before speaking, communicates something entirely different. It communicates that this person is not being chased by their circumstances. Energy performs. Steadiness leads. There is a moment in most important conversations when presence either holds or collapses. It's the moment when something unexpected happens. A challenge you didn't anticipate. A silence that lasts longer than comfort allows. A question that lands in a place you hadn't prepared for. In that moment, the instinct is to move, physically, verbally, emotionally, to do something that closes the gap and restores the comfortable forward motion of the conversation. Presence is the ability to stay in that moment without fleeing it, to let the unexpected land without immediately trying to neutralize it, to hold the discomfort of not yet knowing what comes next, to remain physically still, emotionally steady, and attentive while the moment resolves itself at its own pace. This is not passivity. It is one of the most active things a communicator can do, because the alternative, the anxious rush to fill, to fix, to explain, is what most people do. And what most people do in those moments is give away the very quality that the moment was testing for. Presence isn't built in the easy moments. It's built in the ones where everything in you wants to escape, and you choose, quietly, to stay. This means that the work of presence isn't done in the room. It's done before it. In the 2 minutes before a difficult conversation. In the breath you take before walking through the door. In the decision, made quietly and deliberately, to bring the most settled version of yourself into the most pressurized situation you're about to enter. That decision, made consistently, over time, is how presence becomes not something you perform, but something you simply are. Section 5. Precision over volume. The most powerful communicators you've met probably spoke less than you remember. There is a habit so common, so deeply embedded in the way most people communicate, that it has become almost invisible. It sounds like this. So basically what I'm trying to say is, and I think this is kind of important, is that, the way we've been approaching this has sort of been, I don't know, maybe not the most effective approach. And I just think that, moving forward, it might be worth considering whether we could potentially look at doing things a little differently. Count the words. Then ask yourself, what did it actually say? Almost nothing. And it took 47 words to say it. Now consider the alternative. This approach isn't working. I think we need to change it. 13 words. The same meaning. Infinitely more authority. This is the gap between volume and precision. And it is one of the most consequential gaps in all of human communication, because the people on the other side of your words feel it, even when they can't name it. They feel the difference between someone who knows what they mean and someone who is searching for it in real time. Why do people use more words than they need? The answer, when examined honestly, almost always comes back to the same root: uncertainty. Not necessarily uncertainty about the facts. Uncertainty about how the words will land. About whether the listener will accept what's being said. About whether the speaker has the right to say it as directly as they feel it. Verbal padding, the kind OFS and sort OFS and basically, is not accidental. It is a linguistic cushioning system, a way of softening the edges of a statement before it reaches the listener, so that if it isn't received well, the speaker can retreat into the imprecision. It is a hedge, and hedges, while they feel safe in the moment of speaking, communicate something the speaker rarely intends. I'm not sure I have the standing to be direct with you. The listener doesn't consciously process this, but they feel it, and they respond to it, not with engagement and trust, but with a vague, unexamined sense that this person is not certain of their own position. Precision, on the other hand, communicates the opposite. Even when the content is uncertain, even when you genuinely don't know the answer, saying so directly is infinitely more authoritative than burying uncertainty inside a fog of qualifying language. I don't know yet is more commanding than, it's kind of hard to say at this point. There are a lot of factors involved. Clarity, even about uncertainty, is still clarity. There is an exercise worth attempting, not just thinking about, but actually doing. For 1 week, remove these words from your spoken communication entirely. Basically, kind of, sort of, I just think, maybe, potentially, might want to consider. It could be argued, not because these words are inherently wrong, but because removing them will force you to confront what you're actually trying to say, and whether you're willing to say it without the cushion. The discomfort you feel when you try this is important information. It shows you exactly where your communication is operating from anxiety rather than clarity. It shows you the places where you've been asking for permission to speak rather than simply speaking. There is a particular form of precision worth special attention. It is the declarative sentence, the plainest, most direct form of communication available. Subject, verb, object, done. This strategy isn't working. I disagree with that approach. We need to make a decision today. I don't have enough information yet. These sentences do something elaborate, carefully cushioned communication cannot do. They land. They arrive at the listener's attention with their full weight intact, because nothing has been done to reduce them in transit. The discipline of the declarative sentence is not a discipline of bluntness. It is a discipline of respect for the listener's time, for the conversation, and for your own thinking. Precision also operates at the level of the whole conversation. Most people say roughly 3 times more than the conversation requires. They recap things the other person already knows. They provide context that wasn't asked for. They summarize their own points after making them, as if uncertain the listener received them the first time. Reducing this, choosing to say the essential thing and then stopping, requires resisting the pull to fill the space after your words with more words. To trust that what you've said was enough. To let the silence after a clear statement do its work. Silence after a precise statement doesn't communicate awkwardness. It communicates weight. The most powerful communicators you've ever encountered probably spoke less than you remember. Memory compresses. What stays is not the volume of what was said, but the weight of it. The sentences that landed so cleanly they needed nothing added to them. That is the goal. Not to say more, to say less, and mean all of it. Section 6. Silence as communication. The discomfort of silence belongs to the listener, not to the speaker. There is a moment in almost every important conversation that most people spend their entire lives trying to escape. It arrives without warning. The word stop. The expected response doesn't come. The comfortable forward motion of the exchange suddenly stalls, and what opens up in its place is a quiet, formless gap. Silence. And for most people, even 2 or 3 seconds of it triggers something close to panic. A physiological urgency. A pressure that builds rapidly and demands release through the nearest available exit, which is almost always more words. Any words. Words that exist not to communicate anything meaningful, but simply to close the gap. Watch any conversation under pressure and you'll see it. The question lands. The silence opens. And within seconds, sometimes less, someone fills it. Not because they have something valuable to add, because the silence itself became unbearable. What almost no one realizes in that moment. The discomfort of silence belongs to the listener, not to the speaker. And the person who understands that, who can sit inside a silence without needing to escape it, holds a form of social power that is almost impossible to manufacture through any other means. When most people encounter silence after they've said something, asked a question, made a request, offered a position, they read it as negative, as rejection, as disapproval. The social conditioning around silence is almost universally negative. We are trained from childhood that silence in conversation is a problem to be solved. But consider what silence actually communicates when it's held deliberately. It communicates that the speaker is not afraid of the moment, that they don't need the other person's immediate validation to remain comfortable, that they have said what they intended to say and are content to let it stand. The willingness to let your words sit in the air without immediately reaching out to adjust them is one of the most powerful signals of psychological security available in human communication. There are different kinds of silence, worth learning to distinguish between them. The first is the silence of hesitation, involuntary, the gap that opens because the speaker doesn't yet know what to say. This silence has a particular texture, visible discomfort, eyes moving, body shifting, a quality of searching. People feel this silence as weakness because it is the absence of control rather than an expression of it. The second is the silence of processing, when a listener is genuinely absorbing something complex or unexpected. This silence is neutral. It signals engagement, not rejection. Skilled communicators recognize this silence and resist the impulse to interrupt it with more explanation. The third, and most powerful, is the silence of deliberate choice. The pause that follows a clear statement, held not because the speaker is uncertain, but because they've chosen to let the moment breathe. This silence has a completely different texture. It is still. It is settled. It communicates, without words, that the speaker is comfortable here, that they have no need to rush, no anxiety about what the silence might mean. This is the silence worth developing. There is a specific application of silence that the most effective communicators use, and that most people never consider. It is the use of silence as a response to a question you are not yet ready to answer. The pause before answering a difficult question, a real pause, 3 to 5 seconds, unhurried and deliberate, does not communicate that you don't know the answer. It communicates that you take the question seriously enough to think before responding. Most people treat the pause before an answer as a liability. In reality, used deliberately, it is the opposite. Evidence of someone who respects both the question and the person asking it enough to actually think. Try this in your next difficult conversation. When a question arrives that puts pressure on you, pause. Breathe once. Let the question settle. Then answer from a position of having chosen to respond, rather than having been compelled to. The difference in how that response is received will be immediate and unmistakable. Silence also functions as a powerful tool in negotiation. In any conversation where competing interests are present, state your position clearly, completely, without hedge or qualifier, and then stop. Don't explain why. Don't immediately offer alternatives. Don't reach into the silence with additional words to make the listener more comfortable. Simply state the thing, and let the silence that follows do its work. Because here is what silence after a clear, direct position does. It puts the weight of the next move on the other person. It prevents you from negotiating against yourself before the other person has had the chance to respond. The people who have learned to ask and then stop tend to get more of what they ask for, not because they ask more loudly, but because they trust their words enough to let them stand. There is a quality that develops over time in people who have made peace with silence. It is difficult to name precisely, but you felt it in certain people. They don't seem to need the conversation to go anywhere in particular. They're not pushing it forward, not managing its direction, not filling its spaces with energy designed to keep things moving. They're simply present in it. This quality makes them magnetic in a very specific way, because most people in conversation are subtly trying to get somewhere. The person who isn't trying to get anywhere feels, by contrast, like an enormous relief. That is the deepest gift of comfort with silence. Not just the authority it communicates in difficult moments, but the quality it brings to every ordinary exchange. The sense that this is a person who is fully here, in no hurry, genuinely present, which is, in the end, what all of us are looking for in the people we choose to trust. Section 7. Speaking without needing approval. Approval-seeking language doesn't feel like weakness from the inside. It feels like consideration. Listen carefully the next time someone wants something. Not in an obvious way, not the straightforward ask, the clean and uncomplicated statement of need. Listen for the other kind. The kind that arrives dressed as a statement but carries, hidden inside it, a question. You'll hear a slight upward inflection at the end of a sentence that should have ended flat. You'll hear a qualifier inserted before the most important word, just, kind of, sort of, a little bit. That reduces the weight of what's being said before it has the chance to land. You'll hear someone make a clear point and then immediately add context that wasn't asked for. What you're hearing, underneath all of that, is a question, not a spoken one, an implicit one, woven through the language itself. Is this okay? Am I allowed to say this? Are you still comfortable with me? This is approval-seeking communication, and it is so widespread, so normalized, so deeply embedded in the way most people have learned to speak, that most people don't recognize it in themselves at all. Because approval-seeking language doesn't feel like weakness from the inside. It feels like consideration, like diplomacy, like socially intelligent awareness that other people have feelings. And all of that is true. But there is a line, frequently crossed, rarely examined, between genuine consideration for others and the quiet compulsion to manage how others feel about you at the expense of communicating clearly. When softness is chosen, it is a form of emotional intelligence. When it is compelled, it becomes a way of prioritizing your own comfort over the clarity of what you're trying to communicate. The roots of approval-seeking communication run deep. Most of it begins long before adulthood, in the early discovery that certain ways of speaking produce approval and certain ways produce discomfort. That softening a statement makes the listener more comfortable. That hedging a position makes disagreement less likely. These are not irrational discoveries. In many contexts, particularly in childhood and adolescence, they are genuinely adaptive. The problem is that they calcify. They become default settings rather than conscious choices. And by the time most people reach professional or leadership contexts, where clarity, directness, and the ability to hold a position under pressure are genuinely required, the approval-seeking pattern is so automatic it operates completely beneath the level of awareness. The first step toward changing it is simply hearing it, not in others, in yourself. Start listening to your own speech the way you might listen to someone else's. Notice when you soften something that didn't need softening. Notice when you add a qualifier to a statement you actually feel certain about. Notice when you look around the room after making a point, checking, scanning, searching for confirmation that it landed well. That scanning is the tell. It is the physical expression of the approval-seeking impulse. The moment when the communication has technically ended but the speaker is still in it, still needing something back from the room before they can feel settled. Settled communicators don't scan. They speak. They stop. They wait. Not anxiously, but patiently, from a place of having said what they meant and being genuinely comfortable with the fact that they said it. There are specific language patterns worth identifying and consciously replacing. The first is the upward inflection on declarative statements. Ending a statement with a rising tone, the intonation of a question applied to something that isn't one. I think we should move forward with this plan. The content is a position. The delivery is a request for permission to hold it. The fix is simple and uncomfortable in equal measure. End statements with a falling tone. Let the sentence land. The second pattern is the preemptive justification. Explaining why you're about to say something before you say it. Cushioning the content before it even arrives. Replace it with the statement itself, unaccompanied. Trust that the content can stand without a defensive introduction. The third pattern is the trailing check. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Right. Used habitually, these phrases communicate a persistent anxiety about whether you're being understood and accepted, which is a very different thing from whether you're communicating well. Here is what changes when you begin to speak without needing approval. The most immediate change is internal. There is a quality of relief in saying something directly, something you actually believe, without the armor of qualification, and discovering that the sky doesn't fall, that the listener receives it, that the relationship survives and often deepens because the directness was a form of respect. Treating someone as capable of handling your honest communication is one of the most genuine forms of regard you can offer them. The second change is in how others respond to you over time. People who communicate from security, who make statements without needing them immediately ratified, who hold positions without immediately checking whether the room approves, tend to be trusted more. Not because they're more confident in the performative sense, but because there's a consistency to them, a quality of being the same person regardless of how the conversation is going. That consistency is rare, and rare things, in the economy of human attention, carry disproportionate weight. The certainty that approval-seeking communication is always searching for on the outside was never there to find. It was always only available from the inside. Section 8. Reading emotional energy. Before you speak, the room already has a temperature. Before you speak, the room already has a temperature. It was set before you arrived, by the conversation that happened just before you walked in, by the news that landed an hour ago, by the unresolved tension between two people sitting across from each other who haven't yet said what needs to be said, by exhaustion, by anticipation, by the particular weight that settles over a group of people who all sense that something important is about to happen. Most people walk into that temperature without checking it. They arrive with their agenda, their point to make, their question to ask, their energy to bring, and they deliver it into whatever emotional atmosphere they find, without pausing to ask whether the room is ready to receive it. This is one of the most common and most costly communication failures in professional and social life. Not because the content is wrong, because the timing is, because the emotional register is mismatched. You've seen this happen. Someone walks into a tense meeting with an upbeat energy that reads, immediately, as tone deaf. Someone delivers a joke into a silence that needed something else entirely. Someone presses a point with urgency in a room that was already overwhelmed. The content, in isolation, might have been entirely appropriate, but the failure to read the emotional temperature of the space made it land wrong. And once something lands wrong, recovering the room's trust is far harder than reading it correctly would have been. Reading emotional energy is not a mystical skill. It is, at its core, a listening skill, applied not just to words but to everything words carry with them and everything that exists in the spaces between them. It begins before you speak. In the moment you enter a conversation or a room, before your agenda takes over, there is a window of pure receptivity. A few seconds in which you can take in the emotional information that the environment is already broadcasting. What is the pace of speech in this room? Hurried or measured? What is the physical posture of the people in it? Open or closed? Forward-leaning or withdrawn? Is eye contact being made or avoided? Is there an undercurrent of energy that doesn't match the surface topic of conversation? These signals are available to anyone who pauses long enough to receive them. The difficulty is that most people don't pause. They arrive already talking. The communicators who read rooms most accurately are the ones who treat the first moments of any interaction as information gathering rather than message delivery. Who ask themselves, quietly and quickly, before they open their mouth, what is actually happening here? And what does this moment need from me? There is a particular failure of emotional reading worth naming specifically because it is so common in leadership contexts. It is the failure of the solution-first response. Someone brings a problem to a manager, to a colleague, to a mentor, and before they finish speaking, the listener has already pivoted to solutions. The advice arrives quickly, efficiently, helpfully, and yet somehow it lands badly. The person who brought the problem doesn't feel helped. They feel dismissed. What was missed was the emotional temperature of the communication. The problem, on the surface, was a practical one. But the energy around it was communicating something else entirely. Not solve this, but see this. See me inside this. Sometimes the most intelligent response to what someone is telling you is not an answer. It is the quality of your attention, the signal that you received, not just the words, but the weight of them. Reading emotional energy accurately and adjusting your communication in response to it is not manipulation. It is respect. It is the recognition that the person across from you is a full human being arriving at this conversation from somewhere, carrying something, and that what they need from you may not be identical to what you plan to deliver. The adjustment doesn't have to be large. Often it is subtle, a shift in pace, a softening of tone, the decision to ask a question before making a statement, the choice to sit with someone in their difficulty for a moment before moving toward resolution. But those small adjustments, made consistently and genuinely, are what transform a technically competent communicator into one people actively seek out, into one people trust not just with information, but with the things that actually matter to them. People remember, far longer than they remember what you said, how it felt to be in a conversation with you, whether they felt seen. That feeling begins with reading the temperature before you try to change it. Section 9. Trust through honesty. Trust is not built through the absence of difficulty. It is built through how difficulty is delivered. There is a particular kind of communicator that almost everyone has encountered. They are articulate, polished. They choose their words carefully, perhaps too carefully. Every difficult message arrives wrapped in so many layers of diplomatic softening that by the time it reaches you, the actual content has become almost impossible to locate. Every piece of critical feedback is cushioned between two compliments. Every uncomfortable truth is delivered at such an angle that you leave the conversation genuinely unsure whether you were told something important or simply managed. They are skilled communicators in the technical sense. And yet, something about the experience of talking with them produces, over time, a quiet and persistent unease. You don't quite trust them. Not because they've lied to you, not because anything they've said has been demonstrably false, but because there's a gap, felt rather than seen, between the surface of their communication and whatever is actually underneath it. A sense that the words are always arriving pre-processed, filtered through some calculation about how they'll land before they've been allowed to simply be true. That gap is what erodes trust, not dishonesty. The performance of honesty in the absence of it. Real trust, the kind that accumulates over time and survives difficulty, is built almost entirely on one quality: the sense that the person across from you will tell you the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable, that they will not manage your reaction at the expense of your understanding, that what they say to your face is what they would say in your absence. This sounds straightforward. In practice, it requires a particular form of courage that most people underestimate, because the pull toward comfortable dishonesty is not malicious. It is kind. It comes from a genuine desire not to wound, not to destabilize, not to introduce difficulty into a relationship that is currently smooth. People do not trust communicators who protect them from difficult truths. They trust communicators who deliver difficult truths with enough care that the delivery itself communicates respect. The distinction is not between honesty and kindness. It is between honesty as a value and comfort as a priority. When comfort becomes the priority, when the management of the listener's emotional state in this moment matters more than the accuracy of what they receive, something is quietly sacrificed. And the listener, even when they can't name what's missing, feels the sacrifice. There is a specific way that overmanaged communication betrays itself. I think you did a really great job overall, and I want to be clear that this is just a small thing, but there were maybe 1 or 2 moments where, and this is just my perspective, the approach could potentially have been slightly more. The listener receives the softening long before they receive the content, and what the softening communicates, before a single word of substance has arrived, is that the speaker is more concerned with how this feels than with whether it is understood. Compare it with this. The presentation was strong. One thing I'd change: the data in the second half needed more context. Audiences lost the thread there. Same feedback, a fraction of the words, and something qualitatively different in the experience of receiving it. A sense of being spoken to as someone capable of handling a direct observation, rather than someone who needs to be carefully managed toward it. That sense of being treated as capable is one of the most underrated components of trust. Directness and warmth are not opposites. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about honest communication. The assumption is that to be direct is to be cold. That precision requires the removal of care. In reality, the opposite is closer to the truth. Directness, delivered from a place of genuine regard, is one of the most intimate forms of communication available. It says, "I respect you enough to tell you the truth. I trust the relationship enough to let it hold an uncomfortable moment. I believe you are capable of receiving this without being diminished by it." That belief, communicated through the quality of your honesty, is what genuine warmth actually looks like. The practice of honest communication is not a destination. It is a daily decision, made in the small moments as much as the large ones. In the meeting where you disagree but find it easier to stay quiet. In the feedback conversation where you soften something that needed to be said plainly. Each of those moments is a choice. And the cumulative weight of those choices, made consistently, over time, in the direction of truth rather than comfort, is what builds the kind of trust that survives pressure. That reputation is built slowly. It cannot be performed. It can only be earned, one honest conversation at a time. Section 10. Influence through clarity. Influence is not the winning of arguments. It is the giving of clarity. There is a misconception about influence that shapes the way most people approach communication and quietly limits them. The misconception is this: that influence is a product of persuasion. That the most influential people in any room are the ones who argue most compellingly, who marshal the most evidence, who construct the most airtight case for the position they're advancing. That influence, at its core, is about winning. It isn't. The most influential communicators you've encountered in your life, the ones whose words actually changed how you thought, whose perspective stayed with you long after the conversation ended, were almost certainly not the ones who argued hardest. They were the ones who were clearest, who made one idea land so completely, so precisely, that it didn't require defense or elaboration. Clarity is the highest form of influence, and it is rarer than almost any other communication quality. Most people, when they want to influence someone, instinctively add more context, more supporting evidence, more angles, more language, as if the sheer accumulation of words and reasoning will eventually tip the listener toward agreement through weight alone. But the mind doesn't work that way. The mind is not a scale that tips when enough evidence is loaded onto one side. It is a pattern recognition system that responds to signal over noise. And in most communication, the noise dramatically overwhelms the signal. Clarity cuts through that noise, not by adding to it, but by removing everything that isn't essential. This requires a particular kind of intellectual honesty, the willingness to ask yourself before you speak, what is the one thing I actually want this person to understand? Not the three things, not the full context. The one thing. There is a test worth applying to any important communication before you deliver it. Can you say it in one sentence? Not a long sentence. Not a compound sentence with 3 subordinate clauses. One sentence, clean, direct, complete. A sentence that contains the full weight of what you mean without requiring anything around it to make sense. If you can't, the thinking isn't finished yet. Not because the idea is too complex to be simple. Most genuinely important ideas are simple at their core, but because the work of compression hasn't been done, the idea is still in its raw form, waiting to be refined into something that can actually land. When that compression happens, when you find the sentence that holds the whole idea, something shifts. The communication that follows becomes more confident, more direct, more assured, because you know what you're saying. And when you know what you're saying, the people listening can feel that certainty, not because you've persuaded them, because you've been clear enough that they could actually decide. That is influence, not the winning of arguments. The giving of clarity, offered generously, precisely, without the noise that makes most communication so difficult to receive. Section 11. Becoming the person your words create. Every conversation is a step in a direction. The only question is whether you choose which direction. Every word you've spoken in your life has been a vote for a version of yourself. Not a dramatic vote, not a conscious one in most cases, a quiet, incremental one, made in ordinary conversations, in unremarkable meetings, in the small exchanges that seem too insignificant to matter. But they accumulated. They always do. And what they built, slowly, invisibly, across thousands of interactions, is the communication identity that people experience when they're in a room with you. That identity is not fixed, but most people live as though it is. They carry the communication patterns they developed in their 20s into their 40s. They speak under pressure the same way they did when the stakes were lower and the consequences were smaller. They fill silence, over-explain, seek approval, react before thinking, not because these habits serve them, but because habits don't require a reason to continue. They only require the absence of a decision to change. This audiobook has been, at its core, about making that decision. Not once, dramatically, as a resolution or a commitment, but repeatedly, quietly, in the ordinary moments that are the actual fabric of a communication life. The transformation this material points toward is not a personality transplant. You are not being asked to become someone else. You are not being asked to adopt a different style or perform a version of authority that doesn't fit who you actually are. The leaders who communicate most effectively are not the ones who have learned to imitate a particular model of leadership presence. They are the ones who have learned to remove the interference, the anxiety, the approval seeking, the reactive speech, the verbal padding. What remains, when the interference is cleared, is not a constructed persona. It is simply you, thinking more clearly, speaking more precisely, listening more accurately, and carrying yourself with the quiet steadiness of someone who has done the internal work. That work is not completed in a single audiobook. It is not completed at all, in the sense of being finished. It is an ongoing practice, a daily decision, made in the 2-second pause before a reactive response, in the deliberate silence after a clear statement, in the choice to say the honest thing rather than the comfortable one. What changes, over time, as that practice deepens, is not just how others perceive you. It is how you perceive yourself. There is a particular quality that develops in people who have learned to trust their own communication, who have discovered, through repeated experience, that their words can carry weight without being performed. That silence doesn't need to be filled to be comfortable. That directness doesn't damage relationships, but deepens them. That quality is something close to ease. Not the ease of someone who doesn't care, but the ease of someone who has made peace with the fact that they cannot control how every word lands, and has stopped trying to. That ease is what people experience as authority, as presence, as the quality that makes certain communicators magnetic, not because of what they say, but because of what it feels like to be spoken to by them. The person your words create is not a destination. It is a direction. And every conversation, every pause before a reactive response, every moment of choosing precision over volume, every silence held long enough to let a clear statement breathe, is a step in that direction. You have been building a communication identity your entire life. The only question that remains is whether you build the next chapter of it consciously. That choice begins in the very next conversation you have, not with a grand gesture, not with a performance of the things you've learned here, simply with a slightly longer pause, a slightly cleaner sentence, a slightly steadier presence in a moment that used to make you reach for more words. That is enough. That is, in fact, everything. Because leadership, real leadership, the kind that is felt before it is explained, is never built in the extraordinary moments. It is built in the accumulation of ordinary ones, chosen deliberately, practiced quietly, until they become not what you do, but who you are. The calm that remains. Something has shifted. You may not be able to name it precisely. You may not feel it yet in a way you could explain to someone else. But something has moved, quietly, at the level where real changes happen. Not in the surface layer of thought, where ideas are collected and forgotten. Deeper than that. This is what understanding feels like when it goes somewhere real. Not the bright flash of an insight that fades before morning. Something quieter, something that settles. Sit with that for a moment. There is no hurry now. Most experiences, books, conversations, courses, end the same way. There is a final idea, a closing summary, a list of things to remember and apply, and then the listener returns to the noise, the notifications, the next item on the list, the relentless forward motion that never quite stops long enough for anything to become part of you. This is different. This ending asks something different of you. Not action, not application, not the immediate translation of understanding into productivity. Just this. The willingness to stay a little longer in the quiet that understanding leaves behind. Because this is where the real work happens, not in the listening, in the stillness after. Think about what your mind was carrying when you first pressed play. The half-finished thoughts, the conversations you were still rehearsing, the subtle, persistent tension of moving through a world that rarely pauses long enough for you to catch up with yourself. Most people live in a condition of low-grade mental noise they've stopped noticing. The way you stop hearing the hum of an air conditioner after the first few minutes. The noise becomes the background, and the background becomes normal, until, occasionally, it stops. And in the silence that follows, you remember what it felt like before the noise began. Clearer, more spacious, more like yourself. That clarity is not something you have to create. It is what remains when the interference is removed. The interference has many names. Anxiety about how you're being perceived. The habit of managing every interaction rather than simply being present inside it. The reflexive reach for more words when silence would have served far better. The quiet desperation of speaking from the need to be accepted rather than the intention to be understood. These things create noise. And when they quiet, even slightly, even temporarily, something emerges underneath them that has always been there. A stillness, a groundedness, a version of yourself that is, without effort, precisely enough. There is something that long silence eventually teaches, if you allow it. It teaches you that most of what felt urgent wasn't. That most of what felt threatening was simply unfamiliar. That most of the words you rushed to fill the space with, the qualifiers, the hedges, the anxious amendments, were not protecting you. They were preventing you from arriving at the version of yourself that the moment was waiting for. Silence is not empty. This is what most people spend their lives not knowing. Silence is not the absence of something valuable. It is the presence of something most people are moving too quickly to feel. It is the place where your actual thinking lives, beneath the noise of your performed thinking. The performed thinking is fast, reactive, concerned with how it will land before it has decided where it is going. The actual thinking is slower, more honest, more likely to arrive somewhere that matters. And the only way to access it, consistently, reliably, under pressure, is to have made peace with the silence it requires. Not tolerance of silence, peace with it. The difference between those two things is the difference between enduring something and being at home in it. Home in it. That phrase is worth sitting with. Because what authoritative communication ultimately is, when you peel back all the technique, all the strategy, all the neuroscience, is the feeling of being at home inside your own mind while other people are present. Not performing comfort, not manufacturing calm, simply having nowhere else you need to be. There is a version of you that has always existed beneath the communication habits you developed for survival. Before the approval-seeking calcified into reflex. Before the pause became so uncomfortable that words arrived just to end it. Before the fear of landing wrong became louder than the intention to say something true. That version of you, the one with an uncluttered relationship to their own thinking, has not gone anywhere. It was simply waiting. Waiting for you to stop performing long enough to notice it was still there. Beneath every habit that has kept you small in conversation, there is a person who simply knows what they think, says it, and trusts that it is enough. That person is not someone you are becoming. That person is someone you are returning to. The returning is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a surge of confidence or a sudden reinvention of how you move through the world. It arrives, instead, in a conversation you've had 100 times, except this time you pause before responding. And the pause doesn't frighten you the way it used to. It arrives in a room where you used to scan for approval after making a point. Except this time you finish the sentence and simply stop, and the stopping feels right rather than exposed. It arrives in a moment of pressure where everything in you used to reach for more words. Except this time you breathe first, and the breath changes what comes next. These are not large moments. They are the only moments. The changes that last are always quiet. Not the announcements, not the resolutions, not the dramatic turning points that make good stories afterward, but rarely produce lasting transformation in the daily texture of a life. The changes that last are the ones that happen in the half-second before a reaction, in the breath before a difficult sentence, in the choice, made so quietly it barely registers as a choice, to hold your position without immediately looking for confirmation that holding it was acceptable. The transformation is not something that happens to you. It is something you practice, until the practice becomes the person. And then one day, you realize you are no longer practicing. You are simply being someone who is comfortable in silence. Being someone whose words carry weight not because they are performed with precision, but because they arrive from a place of genuine clarity. Being someone who can hold the discomfort of a difficult moment without escaping it, because you have learned, through experience, that the discomfort always passes, and what you are capable of saying on the other side of it is almost always better than what you would have said before. Being, finally, someone who trusts their own voice. There is a quality that emerges at the intersection of everything this audiobook has explored. It is difficult to isolate because it is not any single thing. It is the combination of all of them: the pause, the presence, the precision, the composure, the honesty, the silence, living together in a person who has practiced each one long enough that they no longer live separately. They become a single quality. And that quality, this is the thing most frameworks never quite say directly, is not primarily about communication. It is about the relationship you have with yourself. The relationship between you and your own thinking. Between you and the discomfort of a moment you can't fully control. Between you and the silence that used to feel like failure and now feels like arrival. People with genuine authority over their communication have, almost without exception, made a certain kind of peace with themselves. Not a perfect peace, not the permanent stillness of someone who has resolved every internal conflict. A practical peace, a working peace, the peace that says, I know what I think, I know what I value, I know what I'm willing to say and what I'm not. And from that foundation, however imperfect, however still in progress, I can speak. That foundation is what this has been building toward, not a communication strategy, a place to speak from. In a moment, you'll return to your life, to the conversations waiting, the emails unread, the relationships that require navigation, the moments of pressure that arrive without warning and demand something from you before you've had time to prepare. All of that will be as it was. The world does not pause while you are becoming more capable of meeting it, but something will be different. Not because you have acquired a set of techniques to deploy, because something in how you relate to those moments, to the pressure, to the silence, to the impulse to react before thinking, has shifted, even slightly, in a direction that will compound over time. Slightly is enough. Slightly is, in fact, everything. Because the person who pauses one moment longer than they used to is not making a small adjustment. They are interrupting a pattern that, uninterrupted, would have continued for the rest of their life. One moment of chosen stillness, in a life that had none before, is not a small thing. It is the beginning of a different relationship with every conversation you will ever have. What remains, after understanding, is not a list. It is not a set of reminders pinned to the surface of daily life. What remains is subtler, more durable, more like a change in temperature than a change in schedule. A slightly lower baseline of anxiety in the moments before you speak. A slightly greater tolerance for the silence that follows a clear sentence. A slightly more honest relationship with what you actually want to say, as opposed to what you calculate will be received best. These are not grand transformations. They are the only transformations that are real. The grand transformations, the sudden reinventions, the personality overhauls, the dramatic overnight shifts in how a person moves through the world are almost always performances. Exhausting ones, fragile ones, the kind that require constant maintenance because they are fundamentally at odds with who the person actually is underneath them. The real changes are the quiet ones. The ones that require no maintenance because they have simply become the way things are. The calm that remains after deep understanding is not the calm of someone who has figured everything out. It is the calm of someone who has stopped needing to. You don't need to have every answer before you open your mouth. You don't need the room's approval before you can feel settled in what you've said. You don't need the silence to be filled for the conversation to be complete. You only need to be present, genuinely, physiologically, fully present, in the moment, in the room, in the relationship, without the division of attention that pulls you out of the conversation and into the performance of it. That presence, simple, unhurried, requiring nothing from the moment except your full attention, is the foundation everything else is built on. It was always the foundation. You are only now beginning to feel it as such. There is a kind of quiet that comes only after noise. You cannot manufacture it. You cannot arrive at it by skipping the noise. It is the specific quiet of having gone somewhere and returned. Changed, not dramatically, but in the way that actually counts. This is that quiet. The audiobook is ending, but the work continues in the ordinary moments, in the unremarkable conversations, in the 10,000 small choices that make up a communication life. It continues in the pause before you respond to something that provoked you, in the breath before you walk into a room that matters, in the decision, made quietly and without announcement, to say the true thing rather than the safe one. It continues in the moments of silence you choose not to fill, in the sentences you allow to end without amending them, in the rooms you enter with your full weight, your full attention, and nothing extra layered on top. Every one of those moments is a conversation with who you are becoming, and the person you are becoming is listening. You have spent time in these ideas. They have spent time in you. What happens next belongs entirely to you. It always did. Go quietly, speak precisely, listen deeply, and trust the silence. It has always been on your side.